All right, so let's talk today about education policy, and let's talk today about what some would consider a boogeyman in education called critical race theory. So, what critical race theory is it kind of comes down to a project from the New York Times called the 1619 Project, and the basic idea of it is that racial kind of overtones, societal ills have been plaguing the United States from its inception, especially specific groups of people. Now, the what's happening though is that because some school districts said, this is something that we want to kind of include in our curriculum, politicians, and I'm not gonna get into the side of who's right and who's wrong on the political side, but politicians have gone and said, that this this kind of take of inherent racism isn't something that is there. It's not something that's there. It's not something that we should teach in our schools. It's very kind of against what all that we do. Now, here's the thing though about that. Now, when you look at the United States history, the history of the United States is messy. It's a messy history. Groups of people um, have been brought down. Groups of people have been not treated fairly, not treated rightly, and it's throughout the history of the country. But see, here's where the U.S. has overcome, and this is what we need to teach in U.S. history, is that the U.S. continues to overcome, that we see societal problems, we see societal issues, and we continue to improve on them. Is everything going to be right at the right time? No. But it's that United States, that continuous overcome of its people, of its government, that it continues. That's what the key to the U.S. is. And here's the issue with politicians getting really involved here. Now, is teaching kind of racial issues, is teaching racial overtones? It's a very fine line. You look at some kind of arguments and some kind of things where they're saying there's some things out there that say some people have inherent racism built into them. And they're teaching that you have that inherent racism, you need to get rid of it. And so really you should have it to a point where you say, people need to find their own path, and they need to find the way that they treat other people and treat other people with respect. But really, when you talk about critical race theory, let's put the theory to the side for a minute. If the theory is valid, it's a theory. There's lots of theories in education. There's lots of theories in science. And the idea behind all those theories, some of those theories are incredibly valid. Everything that we've seen scientifically proves that theory, but we haven't been able to say, yes, this is absolute fact. So let's set that kind of the whole idea of critical race theory to the side for a second and kind of talk about it from the education point of view. I think what I have found, especially when you look at history, I'm a former history teacher, getting politics involved in the history classroom is very dangerous. It's very dangerous. It's not the right way to do, because really you start going to what politicians want. You don't start going to historical fact. And so by limiting what teachers can teach, that can become a big issue. That are we going to go and teach that the U.S. was this great power, that everything's great with the United States, this patriotism, or are we really going to teach and that every person in the United States, in the history of the United States, are founding fathers, that they were perfect people? Or are we really going to teach who they really were? Are we really going to teach that they are men? They're men with faults, they're men with problems, but they worked through them to get to the end and to get to where the United States is today. I think that's really the big key. It's not this kind of hunky-dory attitude of history. Now, when you teach younger kids, I think you always teach them as heroes, because that's kind of builds that patriotism and builds that engaging. But as they get older, the key is to kind of really teach what it really is. Really teach the messy history of the United States, that not everything was always perfect for every group of people. Because if we teach that history, we can learn from that history and we can overcome the problems that we've had and that we continue to have. Society is never going to be perfect. Can we use history as a way to learn the lessons to make it more perfect, to make it better? I should say better rather than more perfect. And I think anytime that you get politicians involved, that reality and that learning that comes with it becomes a problem. Because it becomes this kind of, what are the politicians wanting you to teach? It puts limits on it. Now, when you look at kind of how you teach race, should there be limits? Yes. It's a fine line. When you teach younger students, we should teach it from a positive place. As we get older, kids can start to go, okay, this is a theory. It's a theory that has some validity to it, but it's still a theory. I think when you look at kind of critical race theory as it goes through Congress, one of the ones that really stood out to me was Mark Miley, the Joint Chiefs of Staff, who said it's taught at West Point, but it's taught as a theory. It's taught as, can we learn from the history that certain people see? Because when you look at history as a whole, people see it differently. People see it as a positive. People see it as a negative. They see different parts of history as positive and negative. Can we learn from that and make the world a better place? So as you look at this, yes, it's a fine line teaching race. There are ways you can go way to the extreme with it and shouldn't. But it also, as we get more politicians in the classroom, that becomes a major problem because teachers are scared to teach that messy history of the United States that we can actually learn from. And I think that's the biggest thing here, is set that theory aside for a second. It's set that critical race theory aside for a second and look at it from a perspective of, are we teaching kids what really happened, or are we teaching kids what we wished had happened? And I think if you're teaching kids what you wished had happened, you're not learning. And that's my 2 cents.